Hello and welcome to this week's Saturday session with Exam Revision for Junior Cycle Home Economics with Amy. Today we'll be looking at special diets, including celiac disease and high fibre diets, low sodium diets and osteoporosis. Make sure to follow us on our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and our YouTube channel. So today's plan, we're going to look at celiac disease and high fibre diets, low sodium diets and osteoporosis, including exam questions for each of these topics. So special diets, celiac disease and high fibre diets. This is exactly what you need to know when you are studying this chapter. So this is a good point to be able to look at this and be able to yourself be able to explain what all these points are. So the learning intentions are to be able to define celiac disease. So very often they will just ask you to design a menu for a person who is celiac, and if you don't know that celiac means gluten-free, you're going to get completely confused. List symptoms of celiac disease, discuss the treatment for celiac disease, be able to know what the gluten-free logo looks like. Plan a lunch for a celiac, explain what fibre is, identify sources of high fibre in the diet, guidelines for a high fibre diet, and be able to elaborate on the health problems associated with a low fibre intake, and then be able to plan a high fibre breakfast. So I would always get my students to think about what they know before they start the chapter, because there's a good chance that you know more than you actually think at this point. And it's also a good idea after you've studied the chapter to reflect back on what you do know. So celiac disease. So gluten is a protein which is found in wheat and meat products. So people with celiac disease, they are intolerant to gluten, which means they can't digest it properly. Essentially means you have to cut all gluten products out of the diet, because if they do consume gluten, it's going to damage their intestine on a long-term basis and cause a multitude of symptoms in the short term. So symptoms include weight loss, cramps, diarrhea, anemia, and children failing to thrive. So pediatrician will often pick up on this and go get blood tests to see if you are celiac. So treatment for celiac disease, basically avoid anything containing with gluten. So this includes your wheat, your bread, your pasta, cakes and biscuits, breadcrumbs, sauces and soups, and also the likes of your stock cubes. So you should try and use gluten-free products which contain no gluten. So the best way would be to go for your naturally gluten-free products. So this is the like of your corn, your rice flour and your almond flour. So this is the gluten-free logo, and this did come up on this year's Junior Cycle Home Ec paper. So to be able to plan a lunch for a celiac, was this this has come up. It came up in a sample paper, didn't come up in this year's Junior Cycle. So an example would be to make vegetable soup made with a gluten-free stock. You could include a gluten-free bread roll. You could also serve a side salad with a vinaigrette and a gluten-free dressing. So not all dressings are gluten-free, so you need to make sure and look for the logo there, which is the wheat with like a little like eye across it, so it's kind of like an X. And you could serve a glass of water with it as well. So it'd be very important to know how to plan a lunch for all of the different special diets. So breakfast, lunch and dinner, you should be able to plan one out, but here's a sample one for celiac. So what do you know about high fibre diet? So I'd get my students to think about this here, and I'd be thinking back to my macronutrients. So they're my protein, carbs and fats. So in particular carbohydrates, because that is a source of fibre. So you'd be thinking back to that chapter, and you can find all that on our Exam Revision website. Under Strand 1 in Home Economics, where there's PowerPoints, videos, and of course self-assessment quizzes. So fibre is also known as cellulose and is also known as roughage. So all these terms mean the exact same thing. So they are a type of carbohydrate. They are not digested by the body. So basically your body consumes fiber to help push all the food through your intestines, and it maintains good gut health. If you don't have enough fiber in your diet, you're going to become constipated. So fiber absorbs water, which gives you a feeling of fullness. If you don't drink enough water, you're also going to become constipated. So sources of fiber include the likes of your seeds and nuts. They include your leafy veg. They include the likes of apples, including the skins. This is why you should leave your skins on. And the likes of your carrots, tomatoes, butternut squash, and your wholemeal products, so your wholemeal bread, wholemeal pasta, wholemeal, so your brown bread. Okay, so it's all the really healthy stuff. These are the stuff that you should be eating. So it helps with digestion. So then you'll be linking into digestion chapter, digestion basically means how you basically get energy from the food that you eat and how it helps your body to function. So the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, is important, is 25 to 35 grams per day. And if you consume less than your 25 grams per day, chances are you are going to become constipated, and it puts you at risk of loads of illnesses, including cancer. So sources of fiber in the diet, your veggies, your fruit, whole grain cereals. You're thinking all of the really, really healthy foods and your brown type of carbs. You're looking at brown rice and brown pasta, some breakfast cereals, so the likes of your bran flakes are really good for you, and porridge, seeds as well, and nuts. So these will be all sources of fiber, and you should remember this from the carbohydrates chapter. So it shows how all the chapters kind of interlink and how important the actual macro, and micronutrient chapters are, because they're the foundations of the course. So there are certain guidelines or rules which you should consider when you're planning a high fiber diet. So you should choose whole cereals like your wholemeal bread and your whole grain rice and whole wheat pasta instead of the refined cereals. So instead of going for your white bread, choose your brown bread, because there's a much higher content of fiber in it. You should eat high fiber breakfast cereals. So you're thinking of the likes of your granola, your porridge, your bran flakes. You're going to leave the skins on fruit and veg where possible. So maybe as a child, you would have had apples that were in little, like, cut up into pieces and they'd no skins to them, but that's actually then you're removing some of the best part of the fruit. So you want to try and keep the skin on it where possible. You're going to eat whole fruits instead of fruit juices, because when you're making fruit juices, you're actually breaking down the carbohydrates. So if you eat the fruit instead, you're getting better nutrition for yourself. Include pulse vegetables in the diet, so like your baked beans and your lentils. They're very good for you and you can have them very easily in the diet. You should substitute fresh or dried fruit for processed snack foods. So have your apple or your orange segments instead of your dried raisins, because they're full of sugar. Avoid the likes of crisps and salty nuts and chocolate. Try and have the likes of like raspberries and blueberries, much higher fiber content and better for you in general. You should drink plenty of water, because what happens is fiber absorbs water in the intestine, so you're going to need extra, because otherwise you are going to get clogged up and you're going to become constipated. So it's really important to drink plenty of water. So they are the guidelines. I would learn off 3 or 4 of those so you know it. So if you're ever asked to plan a high fiber diet, this could also come up as part of CBA 2, or it come up as part of the cooking skills examination. So there are certain health problems which are associated with a low fiber intake. So these include the likes of constipation. So this is when feces or your waste becomes lodged in the bowel. You can get the likes of bowel diseases, including your inflammatory bowel disease and diverticulosis. So these occur basically when hard feces becomes lodged in the bowel wall, and basically in the long term this can lead to bowel cancer. You can get piles, which are swollen blood vessels, and these occur in the anus as a result of hard waste matter passing through. So basically, if you don't have enough fibre in the diet, your poo is basically going to get stuck in your intestine, and it's going to cause a whole pile of different conditions, very painful, and in some cases can be very serious conditions. A lot of them can be preventable and can be managed well with a high fibre diet. So planning a high fibre breakfast, we have an example here of stewed apples with the skins on, with berries for your extra bit of fruit, and porridge made with super milk. We then have a glass of milk to drink. So with your stewed apples, you're getting a variety of vitamins and minerals, and you're getting a high content of fibre. Your berries have a lot of vitamins and minerals and water, and you're getting your fibre. And then it's important to say what type of milk you're making it. So super milk, this means it's fortified, which means there are added nutrients. So they usually add the likes of vitamin D into it. So if you just said stewed apples with berries served with porridge, you're not going to get full marks. Chances are you're going to get 2 out of 3 in that. By including the stars, or else you can put a line or dots, you are distinguishing between the courses. If you don't have that, you're also going to lose out on 3 marks. The glass of milk makes sense to have it afterwards. So by putting that at the end, you're getting an extra 3 marks. So all in all, this could be worth 18 marks. There was a question this year's exam. Now, it wasn't for a high fibre diet, it was just in general for a healthy 3-course meal for a teenager, and a lot of people would have missed out on stuff by just not being specific enough. Okay, so that's just a sample high fibre breakfast, but there's loads of others you could think of. So that would be a nice easy question if you remember the little tips. So already we've covered celiac disease and high fibre diets, and what we're going to look at next is low sodium diets. And then after that, we're going to look at osteoporosis. So here we have our special diets. So we have our low salt and sodium, and the learning intentions here. So these is what I would be going back to at the end of the chapter when I'm doing my revision notes to know exactly what I need. So these will be taken from the actual curriculum. So this is so that teachers know what they're supposed to teach, but it's also good for you guys to go back and see what you do and don't know. So you need to be able to define salt. So say what exactly salt is, be able to list sources of salt. So this is also linking back to the micronutrients chapter, which would be in strand 1, which you can find on the Examrevision website. You need to know the dangers of salt. Now, we've all heard this throughout our childhood about not putting too much salt on food. You should be able to identify foods that are really high in salt. You should be able to know and explain what happens when there's actually too much salt in the body. And then you should know how to reduce your salt intake. So you want less salt. So when you're thinking about sodium, you're thinking back to the micronutrients chapter. So there's a good few things there that really links in and correlates with this. So sodium or salt, what is it? So we all know that it's this crystal, kind of like powdery, really thin. You can get thicker ones, and it's usually white unless you're getting your Himalayan salt. So it's used by humans, and there are many different forms. So your unrefined basically means that it hasn't gone through a lot of process. So that's your sea salt. So basically what it is there's like these big huge fields full of seawater, and the salt is evaporated are basically dried out by the sun, and they're left with sea salt that is then collected, and then it is put into containers. So it's very natural. You then have your refined salt. So this would go through an extra step, and that would be the really thin salt. And then you have your iodized salt, which contains your iodine, and that's to help prevent goiter. So if you look back to the micronutrients chapter, you'll know about that as well. And there's other forms of salt, but this is all we would need to know for the junior cycle curriculum. So salt is a crystalline solid. it can be white, pale pink, or light grey in colour. So crystalline, you're thinking of your crystals, like your snow crystals. This is linking back then to your junior cycle science as well. So salt is normally obtained or gathered from seawater or rock deposits. So sources of salt, so this would be one of the easiest sources to find because it's everywhere. So it's naturally present in some foods, the likes of your meat, fish and eggs, but we include extras, so we're always adding salt into stuff. So the likes of your processed foods, so thinking of the stuff up the top of the food pyramid, you're looking at your packet of soups. They are so full of salt, and that's kind of why people like them, but they're extremely bad for you. Hence why it is much better to make your own soup. Stock cubes, you'd never think in that little cube that there's as much salt as there is, but it's really salty, especially the own brand ones compared to the Knorr ones. Would be a lot more salt in them. And the likes of your packet and tin food. So basically salt, it dries out food and it prevents microorganisms from growing on it. So it's a really good way of preserving a food. So this is what they used to do back hundreds of years ago. They'd cover food in salt to keep it longer, the likes of the fish, and then they'd wash it off when they're going to use it. And it's kind of just stuck as something that people do to preserve stuff. So likes of your snack foods, and so your crisps, absolutely loaded with salt, and the likes of your salted pretzels, nuts. Like if you think of most nuts, a majority of them just come, like your pistachios, you'd rarely see unsalted pistachios, and we just kind of know them as, oh, they're salted, but they're not grown to be salty. Like your sauces, so a lot of the packet sauces, because they're dry and you just put water into them, they are absolutely like full of salt, very bad for you. Gravy tastes really good, but that again is full of salt. Breakfast cereals, a lot of breakfast cereals surprisingly do have added salt into them, and there are many actually sweet foods that they add it in because it just improves the flavor. So salt is basically everywhere. A lot of people would add salt during cooking, and then they would leave the salt on the table. So chances are you could be cooking, adding a pinch of salt in, and then you go to the table, the other person doesn't know you've already put salt in it, they add a bit more salt, and all of a sudden you're adding a huge amount of salt. Just far too much salt. The likes of your cured foods, so your bacon and ham, we'd all know after drinking that you'd feel like you need to drink an ocean, you'd be so thirsty. So that's to make and preserve them so they last longer. But it makes us extremely thirsty, which is never a good thing. So the dangers of salt in the body. So the majority of Irish people will consume far too much salt, like more than their 4 to 6 grams RDA, like a huge amount more than that. So it means that a lot of us would be, at danger, for overconsumption of salt. And these are some of the dangers. So while salt is essential in our diet, we do need it for all of our bodily fluids. Too much is never good. If you don't have enough salt in your body, it can make you very confused. So you do need a certain level, but because we can get it naturally from foods from the likes of, such as up here, our meat, our fish and our eggs, we don't need to be consuming all these extra processed foods. So we already have far too much in our body. So there's very, very few people that would be deficient in salt. So your RDA basically is 4 to 6 grams per day. So that would be an important one to note down. That would also be mentioned in the salt chapter in the micronutrients in strand 1. So consuming too much salt, it can cause high blood pressure, which is also known as hypertension. So this basically can cause coronary heart disease, stroke, and it can damage your kidneys. And damage to kidneys could result in a kidney transplant then. So this is pretty serious. And to think that most of these foods we consume every day and don't even think about, like we know salt's bad for us, but we don't think that it could be as bad as this. So that's why it's very important that as teenagers you start to realize this and can try and cut down and inform and teach other people in your family and friends the dangers of salt. So here's a little extra point, just more of a curiosity point, that you actually do need extra salt in warmer climates. So this would be like really, really hot places, to replace salt lost through perspiration. So when you sweat, there's salt being released through your sweat glands. But that would not be us here in Ireland at all. So again, on to the effects of too much salt in the body. Hypertension or high blood pressure, whichever you want to write, you will get full marks for. Your coronary heart disease, now that's also known as CHD. So if in your exam you can't remember that, just write CHD, or you could write down something else like a sick heart or something, and chances you're going to get some kind of marks there. Your stroke, so this when an artery becomes blocked and not enough basically blood is getting around the body, which means not enough oxygen is being supplied to the brain, which can cause a multitude of deficits to the poor person. Fluid retention, so this can happen in the elderly where there's too much fluid being retained in their calves, which can actually be very dangerous. It can cause kidney damage. So these are the effects, so you should be learning off those, and they'd be quite similar to a lot of the other special diets as well. So how can we reduce our salt intake? Because we're always looking to reduce something that's causing the effects as bad as these. So you be thinking of the likes of getting parents not to add salt to children's food. So a lot of parents now would try and make their own like baby food and purees, because they are natural and they don't contain any of these added processed stuff like salt. Because if you think of it, if you're having like some kind of baby food and you're making it, it's going to last maybe a day or two in the fridge. But if you go buy it from the likes of Tesco or Aldi, it's in a pouch, and it, like, the shelf life is going to last for a couple of months. There's a reason why it's lasting that long. It's because there's a lot of salt. Now, it can be convenient when you're on the go, and not everyone has the luxury to be able to make their own, but it's just so that people are aware that there is a lot of salt in these kind of foods. So you should use herbs and spices instead of adding salt, because they really do add a lot of flavour. You should use low salt substitutes, so the likes of low salt and low salt foods. So this is an actual bottle, and you can buy it in all the major shops in Ireland, and it's called low salt. So basically there is 66% less sodium, so it is a much better alternative. So everybody should have this in their kitchen. They shouldn't have the old salt that we would usually buy. And just try and use low salt food. So just use stuff which are naturally low, so your fruit and your veg. So from science, you'd know that it's called sodium chloride. So you might see that coming up on the back of a food label, but you don't need to know that it is NaCl. A couple of more tips for reducing salt intake. So keep your salt off the table. Taste the food before adding salt. So a lot of maybe older people would pile on the salt even before they tried the dish, but they may not have needed it in the first place. As you get older, your taste buds do basically they aren't as strong, so you wouldn't taste as strongly foods as you would when you were like a teenager. So that could be why they add more salt, but they should try and reduce their salt intake. So avoid your convenience foods, so the likes of your gravy. Instead of making gravy with the dry packets, try and use it making your own using meat juices. So if you're cooking some steak, keep the juices and add it into water and thicken it up with some flour and corn flour, and it'll be just as tasty. Reduce down your processed and snack foods. So instead of having crisps and nuts and the likes of your pretzels, put some chopped carrots in it, have some cucumber, have some strawberries and blueberries and much nicer, healthier stuff which have a lot more nutritional value. So you should read the labels carefully. Okay, so just because it doesn't say salt doesn't mean it's not there. So salt in a lab is called sodium chloride, which is the symbol NaCl. So sometimes you look at a label and if you don't see salt, you're like, that's fine. But they can disguise it and it's still legal for the companies to do this. So they could put sodium chloride or NaCl. And in some food additives, so this is to make the food last longer, they will call it monosodium glutamate. So basically what this is it's MSG. So when you have your Chinese food and it tastes really, really nice, but it's a bit salty, that's your MSG. And so what it does, MSG kind of makes your brain say, oh, I want more of that. And you keep going back and you eat a lot more than you would usually. So it's not good for you. It would be in the likes of crisps as well. They are trying to phase it out, but it is hard to do. The likes of sodium sulfite, which are also high in salt. So it's really important to look at your food labels. So here is from the NCCA sample paper that came out 2 years ago. And this is a question here. So cookery has become popular with bloggers. Imagine you were a blogger. One of the recipes you share is very popular with teenagers. So cheese, ham, and pineapple pizza. So part 2, explain how you might modify the pizza to make it suitable for a vegan or a celiac. So modify means to change. So that would be a keyword that I would be explaining, or I'd be underlining. Explain means I need detail. So I need to write full sentences. So what I've written there, I wouldn't get full sentence, but you guys are going to write full sentences. Now, we could choose a vegan, which means you do not consume any meat products, or celiac. So for the case of today, because we're looking at celiacs, we are just going to answer the question on a celiac. So a celiac means that they cannot consume the protein gluten. So in this case, we're looking at cheese. Cheese doesn't have gluten in it, unless there are some cheeses, the ones that are grated and they have like this powdery stuff on it. When you touch it, some of those can contain traces of gluten. So if you were a celiac, you'd be opting for getting the block of cheese and grating it yourself. It's just so it doesn't stick together. That's why they add that kind of powdery stuff. Ham is okay unless it has the crumb around it, and in that case you'd be avoiding a ham with a crumb. Pineapple is absolutely fine. So when I'm thinking of pizza, what do I need to make a pizza? I am going to need yeast, I'm going to need water, I'm going to need flour and oil. So yeast is fine, water's fine, oil is fine, but it's the flour, so it's going to be your gluten-free flour that you're going to need to change there. So you would say, I would modify this pizza to include gluten-free flour, as a celiac cannot digest gluten. So that would be the type of answer they'd be looking for there. So it's important to read the action verb, which should be explained, to know how much detail you're looking for. Okay, so here is from the sample paper. Again, so this would be question 6. So this would be part of a short question. So pasta dishes full of vegetables can be a healthy family meal. So we have what is here roast vegetable pasta, and it's from the Safe Food website. So ingredients: we have 20 mils of vegetable oil, we have a red onion, a red pepper, a yellow pepper, 100 grams of chickpeas, 2 cloves of garlic, 400 gram tin of tomatoes, 400 gram grated vegetarian cheese, and 200 grams of penne pasta. So Part A. Describe how to modify this nutritionally balanced dish to suit a family member who's celiac. So what I'd be highlighting there is describe. That's my action verb, and that means I need a lot of information, so full sentences. Modify means to change something, and then I would highlight celiac, which means that they can't digest gluten. So if I go back through the list of ingredients, my vegetable oil is fine for celiac, as is my onion and my pepper, as is the yellow pepper. Chickpeas are fine as well. Garlic is fine. Tin of tomatoes is fine. Grated vegetarian cheese, unless it is the powdery stuff, it should be fine. So the one thing there that I would be getting alarm bells for would be the penne pasta. So if you look at the picture there, that type of pasta. So what you're going to need is gluten-free pasta. So you're going to write, I would modify this dish to change the 200 grams of penne pasta to 200 grams of gluten-free pasta, as a person who is a celiac cannot digest or break down the protein gluten which was found in the penne pasta, and that I give you full marks for that. And that could be worth maybe 6 marks. So it's actually quite a simple question, but unless you know what a celiac is, you're not going to know that you're removing your gluten, so it's important to know the relationship there. So we have looked at celiac disease and high fiber diets, and we have just finished looking at low sodium diets. So next up, we are going to look at our osteoporosis. So special diets, osteoporosis. So these would be what you would need to know. And again, I would say if you have studied a chapter, go back, write down some notes, and then come back to the learning intentions and see, have I actually got all the points that I need to give me a full answer? So we'd be looking at defining osteoporosis. So define means that I need to give a good bit of information. List symptoms. So this means I'm just looking for bullet points. Outline treatment for osteoporosis. So this is looking like I'm going to need to explain how I can prevent or look after a person with osteoporosis. And then I'm looking for planning a meal with a person for osteoporosis. So that one looks straightforward enough. So again, I get my students to think about what they knew before the chapter. So you could write it like in blue pen, and then at the end of the chapter go back and write in a different colour the other bits that you've learned, and it's good to see how much you've learned, the progression of learning. It's also a good revision technique. So osteo means, it's the Latin word for bone, and porosis basically means porous or little holes. So we're thinking back now to science. Now, you don't learn the skeletal system at junior cycle, but everyone has heard of the skeleton from primary school. So the word osteo means bone and porosis means porous. So my students would find it very handy to break down those words so you can actually kind of figure out what it means. So if you look there to the right, there's a picture of a healthy bone versus the osteoporosis. So the osteoporosis is kind of like a crunchy bar kind of effect, and there's loads of big holes. And the bigger the holes means reduced bone density, which means that you're more likely to actually snap and break the bone. Because if it's more, smaller little holes like the one on the left, it's less likely to break. So thinking back, osteo, bone, porosis, porous means little holes. So osteoporosis is a disease in which the bone weakening increases the risk of a broken bone, okay? So because, see down the picture in the bottom, because the one on the right looks more like a crunchy, there's loads more spaces, it's more likely to break. So the bone becomes weak. And you do not need to know how to draw the bones or be able to illustrate the holes like that. It's just for your own visual learning so you can remember. So, symptoms of osteoporosis. So basically, it's the most common reason for a broken bone among the elderly. So you can go for what's called a DEXA scan. It's like an x-ray, and you go into it and it'll be able to see the bone density or how strong your bones are. And then basically, if your bones look like the one on the right, they know you've osteoporosis. And if it's a healthy bone, well then maybe there's another reason why you just broke your bone. Maybe you just caught it in something or something landed on your leg. So bones that are commonly broken. So there's some that are more commonly broken than others. And if these bones are broken, that's when, alarm bells start ringing and they think, oh, this person might have osteoporosis. So it includes the vertebrae in the spine. So the vertebrae are, if we go back to this picture here, if you look, they're underneath the skull. So as you're going down, it's like a long tube, and they're called your vertebrae. And if you don't have vertebrae, you wouldn't be able to stand or walk or anything. So they're extremely important, and it is very serious if you break your vertebrae or damage them. So you're looking at your forearm as well, and the hip. So a hip would be a very common place that people would break. So you're looking at low energy fracture. So it didn't occur due to major force. So it could be the likes of someone giving you a high five, and that could break your hand. You're looking at someone who might be a bit shorter than they were when they were younger. They may have bone pain. They may have joint pain. And then just like sudden pains in areas. So they be the symptoms of osteoporosis. So it's quite a serious disease. So your treatment for osteoporosis, you're thinking about calcium and vitamin D. So you're looking to increase your intake of calcium and vitamin D rich foods. So calcium and vitamin D are micronutrients. So your micronutrients mean you need them in smaller quantities than your macronutrients, and you're looking for the likes of your fat soluble vitamin, which is your vitamin D, and then your mineral, which is your calcium. And you can see here some sources actually of calcium. So you have the likes of your orange juice, your cheese, your yogurts, your cream, your milk. You can get the super milk, which is fortified, which means there is added calcium and vitamin D. So that would be really good for someone with osteoporosis. There is the likes of your seeds and your nuts and green leafy vegetables. If we're looking at vitamin D, you're looking at oily foods such as your sardines and your salmon. You're looking at eggs. You're looking at your peas. Margarine has vitamin D in it. It helps to preserve it and gives it its colour. You're looking at your milk, your cream, your cheese. So very similar sources as calcium. So you could probably nearly learn off the same ones. Now this year in the CBA2, and they asked for a special diet, and what my students, a good few of them would have done, was osteoporosis. So then it just shows that this chapter is not only linking into the micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals, but is also linking into your CBA2, which then forms part of your actual culinary skills exam, which is worth 50%. So if we're looking at planning a meal for an adult with osteoporosis, so this is what one of my students would have done this year for osteoporosis task. That he would have made chicken and broccoli pasta bake made with a creamy roux sauce. So your chicken, you're getting your protein. Your broccoli, you're getting loads of vitamins and minerals. Creamy roux sauce, you are hitting there with the you could add in cheese to it for extra calcium and vitamin D. You're getting your milk there, which is your calcium and vitamin D, and then you're using a bit of butter, which is your calcium and vitamin D, and then you have your star there to show that you have 2 different courses, and then you have a glass of milk to drink. Now, if you want to be a bit extra, you could say that you're using super milk, which is fortified to include extra vitamin D. And you could include your nut milks because they are fortified as well. So this is really important to be able to plan a meal, and it came up in this year's exam, not for osteoporosis but for a different one, but who's to say it won't come up next year. So it's just really important to show that to know meal planning guidelines, and that is a whole chapter itself in Strand 1, which can be found in the exam revision website under the home ec section. So here's just a sample for osteoporosis. There's loads of more you can make. So you could make a carbonara because that's a creamy sauce. You could have chicken and veggies in it as well. You could have a lasagna because you've a roux sauce and cheese in that as well, and milk. You could have there's many different. It's actually a very nice task to get. So here's from the junior cycle home ec paper from this year. And as I was examiner this year, I would have corrected this, and this would have been one of the worst answered sections. So this was on question 13, so it'd be towards the end of the long questions. So what we're looking at here, it says part 2, state one function and one deficiency associated with vitamin D. So these are linking back to terminology, and under the junior cycle home ec section exam revision, I have a whole PowerPoint which explains what all these different terms means, because it's really important to know what these mean. So we're just looking for one function. So function means what it does for my body, and because it says state, it means that I'm just looking for a short and sweet snappy answer. So you could say strong bones and teeth. They did, however, accept just strong bones, or to stop you getting weak bones, or for strong teeth, or to stop dental disease. So that was all accepted there, and that was worth 3 marks for that part. And then deficiency associated with vitamin D. So if you're deficient, it means you're lacking something, so you don't have enough in your body, which is going to cause serious problems. So in this case, it is your osteoporosis. Now, because it says state, it's not looking for you to explain it. However, if you did explain it, you weren't going to get any more marks in this case, but it would be important, learn off what osteoporosis actually is. So osteobone porosis, holes, so you're thinking of a bone with holes in it. They also accepted dental cavities, they also accepted osteomalacia, and they accepted rickets, which is associated with children. So the deficiency would have been 3 out of 3, so altogether this question would have been worth 6 marks, and it was a very poorly answered question, which means more than likely they're going to include something similar in next year's exam, because people answered it really badly. So in today's plan, we looked at celiac disease and high fibre diets. We looked at low sodium diets, and we looked at osteoporosis. So I'm just going to quickly show you what the exam revision website looks like. So this is the junior cycle home economics section, where there's video tutorials for every single PowerPoint that I have created. Now, because the junior cycle specification is divided into 3 key areas, when you click into these areas here, so you'd have your strand 1, which is your food, health and culinary skills. So that's where today's PowerPoint would be from. Then there's strand 2, which is responsible family living, and then there's your strand 3, which is your textiles and craft. Now, a lot of people think that textiles and craft is over and done with once you've done your CBA 1, your creative textiles, but no, they do like to ask a good bit of that in the exam, and it's because they know that people are just learning it in second year and they'll be like, I don't need it again. They especially like the symbols, so I would have a whole PowerPoint there on the symbols as well. So just going back to here, so for each one of these, if I went into strand 1, it would come up something like this. So say if I looked at special diets and I went into the obesity and dental disease section, there would be a PowerPoint, there would be a video, which is the PowerPoint with me doing what I'm doing today here, explaining it all, and you can go back and watch them as many times as you wish. And there is also our self-correcting quizzes. So I ask you about 10 questions and you answer them, and it'll give you your answers. And if say you get something wrong, you can go back over it again. So it's like really good. You could do it at the start of the chapter and write down how much you got, and then you can do it at the end of the chapter and see how far you've progressed. So it's really good. It's like really, quick way of revising something. We then have our resource pack, and we have build your exam. So because there has only been 2 sample papers, and this year's junior cycle exam, there won't be as many questions, say, as in more established subjects like your junior cycle science, which has been going on for 6 years. So there should be some for each, and so you can build your exam and test yourself, and then there will be the answers as well, so the marking scheme, so after it you can go back and correct it yourself, because you do learn a huge amount by going back and correcting yourself and seeing how much marks they allocate and what all, checking yourself and seeing where did I fall down. And a lot of people would fall down with the action verb. So if it said explain, you're looking for a lot of detail. If it says list, you're looking for a short and snappy type of things. Okay, so make sure to follow us on our social media platforms. So Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and our YouTube. So there will be 2 more videos to come very soon, which will be me analysing this year's Junior Cycle 2022 exam paper. So make sure to look through that, because it will be highly beneficial for you. So thank you for joining today's Junior Cycle Home Ec Saturday study session for Home Ec with Amy.